Pioneering surf parks took 10 years to go from pipe dream to paying customers. 10 years! How can digging a hole, filling it with water, agitating that water, and asking people for money be so incredibly complicated? Today's wave pool projects get done on a much shorter timeline, thanks to lessons learned from those early adopters in the space. In Wave Pool Mag sessions, we hear from the brightest minds in the business. Everything's on the table topic-wise, from choosing a tech provider to maximizing food and beverage revenue, and more. So join us for Wave Pool Mag sessions. To Wave Pool Mag Friday sessions. My name is Brian Dickerson. I'm the editor at Wave Pool Mag. And today with me, my guests are Kathleen LaClair and Hazel Geary. A little bit about Kathleen. She's a partner at Leisure Development Partners and leads the firm's Americas practice and has led and managed assignments in the industry for more than 20 years, evaluating the development, potential, and feasibility of attractions for clients like SeaWorld and Premier Parks. More recently, she has contributed to key ventures with American Wave Machines and Kelly Slater Surf Company. Kathleen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Brian. Excited to be here.
Cool. And Hazel Geary is the CEO at The Wave in Bristol, and she comes from a background of leisure sport. Say it for me. Hazel, I'll let you do your own intro because you put it together much better than I can.
Thank you, Brian. I joined The Wave back in June last year, so still relatively new to the industry, but learning very, very fast. I come from a background in health, leisure and fitness, so spent 13 years in kind of leisure developments across fitness and beauty as well.
That's great. Now taking it to The Wave as a CEO. So really great stuff. So for our audience, there's a little chat icon, the little bubble. You'll be able to click on that in about half hour or 40 minutes and go ahead and ask your questions of Kathleen and Hazel. Leading up until that time, we're going to cover a lot of ground, so we'll see what we miss. Let's dig in. So is seasonality a challenge for wave pools? I mean, just open it up, big umbrella question. Do all wave pools go through that? And what does it look like for different entities?
Yeah, so I'll just take it off. Yeah, sure. So I think the short answer is yes, Brian. I think even in a year-round warmer climate, attractions of all kinds, but especially surf pools, are going to face some seasonality challenges. And this could be as simple as your school holidays, school schedules and other holidays, where potentially, even weather, if you're in a market like Orlando or Texas, where you have to potentially deal with hurricane season.
Okay. And Hazel, how do you interpret seasonality?
In a few different ways. I think you've probably seen some of the videos of our ice cracking on top of our lake a couple of weeks ago, and therefore just showing the challenges that seasonality in terms of weather can bring. So the kind of extremes of cold versus nice warm summers, but also, as Kathleen just said, you've got peaks and troughs all over the place, which can be considered seasonality. Everything from key weekends, holiday seasons, school holidays, but also just kind of festivals and other things that are going on that impact your business that you need to be aware of and cause kind of seasonal fluctuations.
Okay. Now, when we first started addressing this program and the topic of seasonality, I immediately think of Alaya Bay, which will close for a few months. Even Waco Surf in Texas will close for January and February. They're two very different venues. One has snow, one has tornadoes. What is do you have to be in a cold climate to have seasonality?
I don't think so. To Kathleen's point, I think it's, that seasonality can be things like any extreme weather, but it also just happens naturally in terms of when people want to be surfing. Everything even to when, if you're anywhere near the ocean, the actual seasonality of waves and what that looks like as well, because that can drive traffic to your site from your kind of core surfer audience. If you've got great waves in the ocean, that might be a more cost-effective way of people place for people to go. And therefore, if there are times of the year where the waves are much better in the ocean, that can cause seasonality for the wave pool itself. So there's lots of different things to consider, and therefore not just a climate-related piece.
addressing the challenges for the different venues, there are certain things that come up. Kathleen mentioned in an earlier conversation programming for the wave and the type of waves, which ties into what Hazel just said about when the waves are good down at the beach.
Yeah, definitely. I think programming is probably like the most obvious one, kind of off the top of the head, is how are you going to bring other people in these off-peak seasons, or even off-peak parts of the week, or even off-peak parts of the day. So figuring out, who your core market is, obviously avid surfers, and then like who else you can tap into. And there's, programming can get very difficult and then very, very lengthy with a lot of considerations. But, if you want to bring more people in at all of those times, you're obviously going to have staff on at those times. So it ties right into kind of the staffing challenge, which is, in a year-round operation, you have your people year-round, and you probably have to figure out the complexities of your summer staff versus your other staff, or how many people are going to be full-time all year versus how many are going to be, variable. Whereas with a seasonal operation, you have to worry about the, kind of the ramp up and then the ramp down, right? You're going to have certain year-round staff, but then you're going to have to hire up for your peak season, and then you're going to have to kind of hire back down as the weather turns, right? And as staff return to high school or college, potentially.
For programming, I know, Hazel, at the Wave, do you change your Wave offerings, your Wave menus during the cold season? I know you have Big Wednesdays, or used to have Big Wednesdays. And can you talk a little bit about how you change your programming at your wave pool to meet the seasons?
Sure. I mean, I think probably our lake schedule is one of the most talked about elements of our business. And it's one thing that we are looking at week in, week out, learning. And we've got 4 years behind us of looking at schedules and working out what is the most effective way of programming, both in that peak season where you've got a really diverse mix of people coming, everything through beginner lessons all the way to your kind of experts. And then as you get into the colder weather, for us in particular, there are times at which the water's too cold to then be having beginners in, or you've got higher winds where then when you've got large soft boards around, they've got a risk of being blown away in a way that shorter boards don't. And therefore you can vary your mix based on who your consumer segments are, who are coming at what time, who can you attract in that weather, but also how do you pull people in? So Big Wave Thursdays has been our kind of winter offering throughout, as we ramp down the year. But it's also making sure that you are still offering for people who just want to come for a day out experience, because the assumption can easily be that for us in the winter, it's only those kind of hardcore surfers. But actually there are still lots of people who are outdoors enthusiasts, keen to try new experiences. And just because it's cold, that doesn't stop them wanting to come to a wave pool. So that programming mix is really, really kind of a challenge, but also a real opportunity. And it's something that we spend a lot of time thinking about. And we look at what we did last year, what our current mix is, what we're forecasting. And we're also just looking at what is booked up ahead and then tweaking things to make sure we're driving the occupancy of the site.
Okay. And in Kathleen, when you're working with surf parks, do you have any kind of blanket advice for programming when it comes to the seasons? Depending on technology, you've worked with American Wave Machines, or worked with Kelly Slater, 2 very different technologies. Hazel is working with a Wave Garden Cove system.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh no, I was just going to say, have you how did you approach that, and what did you advise?
Yeah, there's definitely no one perfect solution or one easy template. Unfortunately, it's going to be very dependent on the technology and what it can withstand and for how long and what temperatures potentially, but then also with your market. So every market is going to be different. I think the one thing, first, when I'm doing projects with surf park clients, obviously a lot of them are avid surfers themselves. So getting everyone to think kind of beyond that target market can be a little bit difficult. But then it, like Hazel said, gets very interesting, and you think about this programming all the time. I think one piece of advice that I would give, and one thing that we certainly look at as feasibility consultants, is what are your peers doing, right? So don't reinvent the wheel every time. Check in with each other. Take a look at each other's websites. What do they do during off-peak times? How are they, discounting during off-peak times and seasons? Who else are they bringing in that you didn't think about? and not only your peers, but look at your local market. What do the other outdoor attractions do when the weather turns chilly? What is the zoo doing? If there's something else that's outdoor that's popular, water park or something, what are they doing during those off-peak times?
Okay, and tying into that, I'm going to jump into the physical planning, which I'm lifting directly off your notes that we exchanged, Kathleen, pre-session. So the physical planning and sizing, like Hazel's venue has a great whitewater bay area, which I imagine it's perfect for summertime, introducing surfers. If you have a technology that's different, say, I think Kelly Slater Wave Company is changing. The one in Abu Dhabi has kind of a W reef, so it's got more of a beginner area. Are there any hard and fast rules you apply from physical planning and sizing of a wave pool?
If the question is to me, I would say no, actually, not anything hard and fast that's coming to the top of my head, but only because the industry is still so new and all these technologies and all these pools are continuing to evolve, so it probably doesn't feel quickly to a lot of people, but so quickly compared to attraction types that are, more established. So you really need to look at the market and the technology in the pool every time to see, just to gain insights into how things should be sized and how much back of house you need. Are you going to have a really robust food and beverage operation, or are you just going to have like a more simple grab and go? I know a lot of the complexes have, very high-end food and cabins that you can stay in and Airstreams that you can stay in. So when you think about your programming and think about the programming of everything, not just of the wave and not just for the avid surfers, what is your whole audience going to need or want, and how much space you're going to need for all of those things? It gets very complex, but it's worth it because you don't want to build it. You don't want to build everything too big and have it feel empty, and you don't want to build it too small, of course, and have your guest experience on a decline because they don't have a seat to sit in, or they can't get a good seat to watch their child or partner surf. And so all of those things have to be considered. And I think it's very still kind of on a case by case basis.
Okay. Hazel, could you speak to the wave, how your physical planning helps you in regards to seasonality, and how maybe in some cases it inhibits what you want to do?
I think one of the great things about the wave is we have a huge amount of outdoor space. And so it means that during the summer months where our occupancy grows, where we've got many more people on site, when the weather is really kind to us, then we've got this ability to kind of expand our offering of things like food and beverage, etc., out into those outdoor areas. And we're always looking at ways. So we introduced the View this year, which is a kind of indoor-outdoor space attached to our main building, which has allowed us to kind of create more occupancy on the days the weather isn't quite so kind to us, which in the UK is more often than not. But it means that when then you're in the winter and there's less people on site, the clubhouse itself doesn't feel empty because you've built it for that summer capacity. So you've got that variance of people. And I can imagine if you had, a 200-seater restaurant and then you have a winter where it's much, much quieter. One, is your kitchen right sized? So do you still have to then run the kitchen with the same team of operators because you haven't actually balanced the size of the kitchen with that kind of that peak and off-peak seasonality? But also for a consumer, does it feel, to Kathleen's point, that you're kind of walking around a big old expansive airport where there's no one there? It's much nicer to have that. And for us at the Wave, we've got that because of because of our planning constraints, because we're in the green belt and therefore there's only so much space that we can build on. But the beauty of creating, this amazing blue space, but with all the green space around it, means that you can just expand out into the kind of the outdoor space, put people around the edges of the pool, and then, your occupancy grows and your capacity grows as the season grows as well.
Wow. And as you mentioned, expanding the Wave, being able to expand out when you have a nice day and you need to accommodate more people. And this goes back to Kathleen's mention earlier about staffing. Like, how do you, and we'll cover this next week in our next sessions. We have 2 special HR people who just deal with this subject, and they'll come on. But for you two to kind of dip into it, how do you, starting with Hazel, how do you scale up and scale down when, there's a heat wave in Bristol and everyone freaks out and goes to the wave pool?
I mean, look, we're just starting to ramp up our recruitment efforts for our summer. So we go from a kind of a peak of about 270 team, and that reduces right down as we go through the winter months. But one of the things that we continue to do is stay in touch with those team members who've left us during the winter as they go off into doing other different things, so that as many of them as possible will come and rejoin us the next summer. So we just had a team day yesterday. You'll see some great videos coming out over the coming days with around it. But keeping in touch with people so that you're not building again from scratch, so you're retaining that knowledge. Being able to deliver training qualifications in house, so allowing you to kind of ramp back up really quickly when you're bringing people in, but also offering those career opportunities such that and career development opportunities such that it's a real great reason for people to come back, so that you can ramp up that staffing. And then as you're going through the peak season, making sure you've got that flexibility of staffing that means that, one, your team can work as and when it suits them in a really efficient way, but it also means that you can ramp up staffing if you've got a great event or there's going to be some amazing weather. But on the flip side of that, if you know that you're going to be quieter, how can you reduce your staffing down? And I think making sure you've got some of that built-in flexibility into your staffing model, and working with your teams to be able to deliver that in a way that feels really responsible, so that it's not just no, you're not going to come in today. That's really important for us in terms of looking after our wave makers and making sure that they feel that the wave is a place for them to work all the way through the season, and that they're bought into expanding up and down as our demand requires.
Okay. And Kathleen, speaking to staffing, you addressed it a little bit earlier. When you're telling a client who's like, okay, we're going to have these OpEx monies to allocate for staffing, and it's going to go, up in summer and down in winter. What do you advise?
Again, it's something that's so complex, right? I mean, even planning for it is one thing. Listening to Hazel talk about having to actually do it makes me glad that that's not something I'm doing all the time. I think it's a challenge whether you're, year-round warmer type climate, or if you're like Hazel at the wave, you're either going to have to hire up and then down again, or you're going to have to figure out how to staff kind of at the same level all year when you still have seasonality issue or question, because a lot of staff is maybe high school or college age kids who are going to leave you at different points, to return to their studies, or people who, maybe you have a lot of instructors who are teachers in the rest of the year, but they come to you in the summer to do that. So there's always going to be complexities to it. And again, it's going to be so dependent upon, the offering and the market that you're in. So there is no kind of, one case that we can tell clients. We just have to work through all of that detail together with them to make sure that, at the end of the day, they're planning the right amount of spend for all that staff, and then when they're going to have to spend it.
Okay. And Kathleen, I want to ask you, you've worked with entities, water parks, SeaWorld, places that aren't surf parks. Is the staffing for a surf park more nuanced and subtle than it is for someplace like a SeaWorld or a Six Flags?
I think, yes, to one point, the size is going to be different. Again, that's going to just be specific to where you are and what the offering is. I think it's most similar to a water park, right? Because you have specialized staff that need certain certifications and training and so forth. But then you're still going to need the food and beverage people, and you're still going to need someone in the retail shop and someone, at ticketing and guest services and all of those things. So, across all attraction types, probably a little bit more because of the safety and training and certifications and so forth. But I think a lot of the attractions face the same challenges when it comes to staffing.
Okay.
And I mean, and globally, right? I mean, across the board these days, staffing everywhere is challenging.
Okay. And
I think, sorry, just to add on to what Kathleen just said around that requirement for skilled staffing, because I think that's an important point to note, is that, where you've got food and beverage and labor and even front of house, you can sometimes get some kind of agency teams to help you out if you've suddenly got a big demand or you've got some things within your staff. Where you've then got your coaching and your lifeguards, getting that skilled labor on short term is almost impossible, and therefore making sure you've got the the breadth and skill set within the team, and that flexibility is a real skill set in terms of making sure that you've got that operational labor model, that you're not carrying too much labor, but that you don't then fall foul of not being able to operate effectively because you suddenly see that there's a huge demand for beginner lessons. So you want to put on more demand, you want to put on more sessions, but if you don't have the coaches, you can't do it. So there's that balance between cost control and also ensuring that you're not kind of losing out on revenue opportunities because you don't have the right staff available.
Yeah. And I imagine, Hazel, that you have to plan that out quite far ahead. I mean, if you know you're having, special events, or like you said, like an influx of beginner lessons, and you need, those sorts of coaches. I mean, you guys must be planning out like a year in advance, correct? In order to be able to know you'll be able to get that staff at that time.
We'll be planning out our season in advance, but then making sure that there is that contingency and that flexibility built in with whatever we're bringing on board. So understanding people's capacity to operate. So how many hours are we going to actually contract them to, but how many hours are they also happy to work up to? So you don't have to contract someone to a full 40-hour contract, but you could contract them to something slightly lower, but knowing that you could pull them in if they're available and they're happy to do so for special events, etc. I think that's a really important thing, is kind of knowing what you're kind of committing to versus what you have available to you, and knowing those two numbers and making sure that you're planning for both of those two things such that you can flex up and down. Because sometimes it's not a matter of planning some of these things massively in advance. If you're seeing, 2-3 weeks out that all of your lessons are booked up, but you know that you have the space available to offer more lessons, but it's the staffing that will then prohibit you or allow you to put that on, that's where you want to make sure you've got that capacity so you can call around the available team members and make sure that you can get them in to be able to put that on. So I think it's that, programming is super important, but in order to deliver the programming and be able to react to the programming, you've got to have that staff, and you've got to have the underlying core kind of a base level of staffing, but you've also got to have this ability to flex up and down. That's really important.
Wow. And that's fascinating, and we'll jump into that more next week. For now, though, the one thing I wanted to bring up that I really enjoy about the Wave is that your marketing, your emails, your getting people in the pool at those low times. You have the frequent member or the members section where you get a discount if you've surfed there more than 3 times, and I know I took advantage of that during my visit. So I'd like to open up the topic to marketing through seasonality. Another interesting thing is Alaya Bay. They had their Winter Cup, which was kind of the celebration of surfing in the cold, surfing in the snow. People went. It was a great event, but they didn't really carry it through to the cold season, and now they close when it's snowing outside. Do you, Kathleen, what would you recommend to companies in heavily season-dependent areas how to do their marketing?
Yeah, it's something that is important, and we certainly plan for financially when we're working with a client. But Hazel's probably better to speak to the specifics of what to do. I think, from a high level, the answer is thinking about who is it that you're trying to attract and when, and then, putting money into those buckets so that you're not missing anybody. Maybe it's, marketing to moms with kids for during the week. And so what outlets are you going to choose to do that, to target those markets? I had a great conversation at Surf Park Summit with one of the owners of Surf Divas. And if you haven't looked up that operation, you should. It's really cool. But they have a class that they do just for moms or parents, maybe. And I'm sure it's, kind of during the week in the middle of the day, but they offer childcare while you're there. So you can be surfing and getting a lesson and doing something good for you, and letting your child see you doing something good for you, and all of the great things that come out of that, while you can still see them, and you don't have the guilt for leaving them at home to do something for yourself. And, it just goes down the line. But thinking through those sorts of things, like how can we don't have moms with kids coming in. How can we appeal to them? What can we do? And then, where are they? And I'm sure there's firms that help you, target specifically those different groups and how to do it. But again, Hazel's much better apt to answer, I think.
Okay, so Hazel, share with us the Waves marketing philosophy, and then some of the actions that you do.
Okay. I mean, I think one of the things that we want to always understand is who are the types of people who will come and visit us during different times of the year, and how we approach those different kind of consumer segments differently. So, for us, there's a real big piece around that core community that we know surf with us regularly, and how we make sure that we reward their kind of that frequency of visit in our pricing strategy. So we have bundles that we now offer year round, but for example, in January, February this year, we've been rewarding people who surf or who book multiple surfs at the same time to reward that real frequency of use and drive people to surf more for a really good value price during the winter months. And we can do that with the audience that we've already got. But we also have to remember that in the kind of the colder months, there are still that audience outside, the people who are what we would kind of term kind of single day users or day trippers. Yeah, how do we still attract those people when it's colder outside? And what are the products and services that we can wrap around our surfing? So you may have seen that we've got our saunas operational this year, and therefore that's a big draw for people, both our regular surfers who love to go and warm up in there after they've had an hour in the water, but also it's a nice draw for people otherwise using the wave and seeing that, yes, it might be cold, but also there's the kind of the cold and the warm. And also this year we've introduced cold water dip. So actually a non-surfing product where you can just go in, use the cold water to all open up to a newer audience, and making sure that we are targeting different people who then might move into surfing at a later date. And I think it's also really important that you've got the right kind of ancillary services around it. So the saunas is one example, the hot showers, but also making sure that the food offer is related to the season, so that therefore you haven't just got one food offer that runs all the way through the year. Because if it's a cold day, you probably are more likely to want a nice hot soup. You want something that's going to warm you up. It's going to feel right for you. And then I think the other thing that we've done and was started last year, but really kind of driving home and finding more ways to make that a great reason for people to visit is creating a nice workspace for people. So that ultimately, if you're driving that frequency of visit, or people are surfing more than once in a day, having somewhere that they can physically sit and do their work as well, so that especially during the week, you can encourage people to come when otherwise they might not do. And using your existing community to kind of fill the lake in that time, as well as still trying to attract new people in, using the same kind of marketing techniques, but just different types of campaigns through that kind of seasonal period.
So Hazel, I have to ask you, in all the work that you do at the Wave to keep people coming in during these colder months, do you ever look at a place like, I don't know, Waikai on Oahu, or someplace where it's warm, Typhoon Lagoon in Florida, where you're like, oh, they have it so easy?
I was thinking about this earlier, actually, and I wonder whether it is that easy, because one of the things around having seasons is it's a point of difference. And therefore, you are working to something different. And I think one of the things that a marketing team will always tell you, and PR especially, and marketing and brand, is that if you've got the same thing and it doesn't change, it gets kind of boring for the consumer really quickly. And that's not saying that Waikai's is boring. Please don't take it that way. I'm very excited to go and visit there at some point in my future. But more, we have a totally different story to tell in winter than we do in summer. Whereas you don't have that if it's kind of summer all year round. And I think that helps us from a marketing perspective, because you do have different stories to tell. Our Breaking the Ice made national news in the UK. It was in multiple newspapers. So whilst it's not necessarily the best thing for us in the world to have to shut because of the ice, the stories we can tell and the brand building we can do is different because of the seasonality. And I think taking it as a strength rather than a weakness is a really important thing for us to kind of consider, and making sure that people feel like we've really considered how our operations are different from the winter to the summer. So we spend a huge amount of time and energy planning for our summer, because that's such a core piece of our kind of our operational puzzle. And what we need to make sure we're doing is spending the same amount of time and energy during our summer months while we're operating, planning for the winter season, and making sure that we're giving it the same amount of care and attention, even though we know our visitor numbers are going to be significantly less, because frankly, there are not that many people who want to surf when it's 5 degrees water. but there are still people who do. And we need to figure out the right ways to do that, the right ways to look after our team when it's cold, because that's a really important consideration. It's not just about our customers, it's about our team as well, because they've got to stand outside. They're the ones who've got to rescue people when the water is cold. Hopefully never, but they have to be on standby to do so. And so having all those things in consideration, making sure we're planning for it and not going, oh God, this is just a really difficult part of our organization, but going, this is the opportunity. How do we seize that? That's, I think, the benefit to us.
Okay. And I want to throw that over to Kathleen. When you're working with a client and talking about marketing, Hazel and the Wave, you found kind of a groove. You know exactly what you need to do to kind of make things happen. Kathleen, if you're dealing with two different clients, one's in a warm climate, one's in a cold climate, from a marketing perspective, what are some strengths you'd give to the cold weather client, and what are some strengths you'd give to the warm weather client in terms of how they should do marketing?
I think my head goes to the challenges first and not the strengths, if that's okay. I think I 100% agree with Hazel that just because a surf park could be in a year-round warmer climate does not necessarily mean they have it easier in terms of attracting people and marketing and keeping their visitor volumes consistent year over year. I think it's actually more challenging, especially if you're in a market where your core customer is your resident, not your tourist. So right, again, to go to like Orlando, it's going to be different there. I dare say you could actually be a little more static of an offering and experience and more leveled marketing, because you're just relying on the tourists who are coming, all the time, and not so much on the residents. But if you're in a Southern California market, that your surf pool is going to be primarily driven by your avid surfer residents, within an hour or two market, you really need to consider all those things that Hazel said, because you don't want it to become a static experience. You don't want it to become their gym, right? Where it's just the same thing every single time. And like she said, and you would get bored with it. So it is still very much a challenge in what you would think would be the dream, year-round warm climate, because you need to think of ways to keep people coming back and keeping it interesting. I think thinking about things that the whole family can do there is a great way to go, because you're keeping your avid surfer happy and where they want to be, and they're, involving the rest of their family who may become surfers on their own down the road. So yeah, just lots of complexities and lots of different avenues that you can go depending on what your offer is and where you're located.
Kathleen, can you give us some concrete examples of advice you've given to some of the different venues that you've worked with? Hazel's forte is very much, this one area, this one pool, their set of challenges. You've worked with more surf parks, and what have you learned? What are some of the differences you'd advise for one park, but not for the other?
So because we're involved in projects at such the beginning, early planning stages, we don't typically get too much what we would say like in the weeds on the specifics of how you will market. It's about making sure you're putting away or planning for the right amount of spending to do it. And that's going to be very dependent upon your market and how much things cost there. But what we do is look at, from clients that we work with, on improvement strategies or expansion strategies, or once the operation is up and running, maybe we help them again down the road for strategy or expansion. We are lucky to have kind of in-house database of how all of these things and all different types of attraction types operate and what they're currently spending in those markets, or in their first year versus their third year versus their 10th year. So the way that we're helping to guide is to say like, oh, in this market for this type of attraction, you probably need to spend, or plan on 10% of your revenues should be going towards marketing that first, second, third year. Typically, after you're more established and stabilized, you can go down on your marketing spend a little bit, because so much of it is going to, your visits are coming from frequent members or surfers and through word of mouth. But in those early years, you should be spending this much, and then gradually you can like drop it down a couple percentage points. So that's how we address it, by helping to guide them with how much they should kind of be putting in that operational bucket.
Okay. And I'd love to pick your brain about some of the non-endemic surf attractions that you've worked with, and if you can tell us how you see those differing from surf parks. You'd advise something different for a water park attraction than you would for a surf park. What are some of the major things that stand out to you?
Across attraction types, it's honestly probably not as big of a spend difference as you would think. And again, it's going to be market dependent, but and also how old the attraction is and how established it is. So I don't think I have anything kind of attraction specific that I would say. It's just a case by case basis, and we take a look at it every single time, not just kind of give everyone like, oh, you should be spending 10%. It might depend, like how competitive is your market. If you're the only surf park or surf pool, that's obviously great, but you're still going to have competition from what else is in the market, just generally how people are spending their time and their dollars. So are you in a city? Is your attraction in a city or rural area where there's really not a whole lot else to do? You're probably not going to have to spend as much as if, you were a certain type of attraction, in Times Square in Manhattan, because the competition there is just so heavy because there's so many tourists and there's so much to do. So it really it's I think a little bit more market specific than it is attraction specific from our point of view.
Okay. I'd like to turn it now to, we've talked about the challenges, the troubles that you have in a season-dependent venue. What are some of the upticks? Like, what's great about being in a season-dependent environment with your wave pool? Is it like Alaya Bay was doing with the cold water classic, cold water challenge, cold water cup? Sorry about that. To get people to surf in the coldest water they possibly could, make snow angels in their wetsuits. Are there upsides to being in a season dependent market?
I guess from our perspective, as I said earlier, the difference, the point of difference, the fact that it's something different to talk about, and that you can wrap your arms around different segments of your audience in a way that you perhaps can't do in the summer. So in the summer where you're super busy, you've got so many different people coming through the door, you're always trying to pay a lot of attention to your community, but it's harder to do so because you've got this volume of people coming through. Whereas suddenly in the winter season, you've got the opportunity to really put on more things for your loyal surfers, for your loyal community. You've got more opportunity to do some of those kind of pricing initiatives that you might not be able to do in peak season where your occupancy is super high. And I think also then there's the opportunity for you to bring new people into a sport who might not think about it in summer because they're doing so many other things and their spend is going elsewhere. So there's lots of different things to do when it's nice and warm outside, but perhaps there's not so many things you might think of doing when it's colder. So there's lots of opportunities to it. And then as an actual operator, it does give us an opportunity. We don't open every single day during the winter season. And so it gives us an opportunity to really look at our site and make improvements where we can that otherwise we wouldn't be able to do when we're operating 7 days a week, 14 hours a day. It allows us to do more training for the core team. It allows us to do more planning and things like that, which, I'd probably rather be operating and driving revenues on those days, but it does give us an opportunity that other parks that are operational 365 days a year won't be able to do. So that is me trying to find the positive in something that could otherwise be seen as negative.
Okay. Kathleen, do you want to add anything to that?
I don't need to. I think Hazel hit it exactly. She hit the three things I was thinking, which is, the ease of doing some maintenance, which can be very hard if you're year round, and sometimes have to, close on certain days. And even that, your community is, used to you always being open. So you'll hear about it. I'm sure that they do. So yeah, the maintenance, the cost, obviously, right? The way it shakes out at the end of the year round versus seasonal to be determined. But, you're definitely saving on some of your utility costs and other costs if you're not operating all the time. And then staffing and training too. So yeah, I agree with Hazel on all those points.
Okay, great. As we wrap it up, I always love to ask this question because our audience are people building surf parks, people dreaming of building a surf parks, people in the industry with auxiliary commerce is that involved in surf parks and wave pools. What advice do you have to someone opening a wave pool in an area that has a lot of seasonal change?
I think from our perspective, I would say if you can heat the lake in a sustainable way, then that would be the best thing you could possibly do. But I would add, please, in a sustainable way. I think that would be the advice I'd give to other people. But I think that big point about see it as a positive, don't see it as a negative. But know you need to plan for it as much as you do your peak season. And know that if you don't get that planning right, that's what can really affect your P&L. Because if you get your costs wrong in that quieter off season, that can hit you as a business much harder than having a slightly, off main season. So those two things would be for me.
Okay. And Kathleen?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I think, we're all lucky to work in an industry, whether it's all attractions or specific to surf parks, where we get to meet and know really great people and really nice people. I think everyone that I've met involved in surf park development, especially because it's such a new and exciting specific industry, is everyone should be talking to their peers, even if you're kind of competitors on some level, because, you're selling the technology or whatnot. Talk to your peers, look at what they're doing, go visit them, go have those conversations. It seems like it's a very welcoming industry and group of people. And I think people planning these projects should take advantage of that, because there's lots of lessons to be learned. I mean, just sitting at Surf Park Summit and hearing some of the different development challenges for some of the projects, don't make the same mistake twice is such a cliche saying, but it's true. And just you don't need to always reinvent the wheel. Like, new ideas are great. And obviously everyone should be sitting around thinking of something new and exciting that they can do, but just also learn from your peers and learn from your local competition, to get some best practices and to get some ideas, by people who are already operating or have been in your shoes before.
So there's doing this, that you brought up a really good point. There's so much, each case is so different. And that's what I found in the wave pool community is everyone's business model is different. You can't apply the same business to each location because you have variances in population, surf community, even to technology. And then the problems you run across, like you were describing, don't make the same mistake twice. It's kind of everyone will have something that they have to address that another party would not. So let's close it up. I'm kind of tripping over my tongue here as we do, because I'm reading the chat comments at the same time, and that's what I was doing earlier on the keyboard. Apologies for the noise. But did you want to add anything before we wrap up?
No, I think thank you very much for the discussion, Brian. It's been great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's been great having you. Shout out to Chris, who just said quick note to say thank you for all the great discussion and insights. And also from Justin, who says, thank you, Hazel and Kathleen. Well done. So now we have Mario. Thank you, guys. Thanks to the interesting advice and thoughts. All right. So no questions, which is great, because that means we covered a lot of ground, and you both went into great detail on so many things. So that's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Hazel.
Okay. So